Great. Well, good evening, and welcome to everyone in the audience, and welcome to those who are watching via the live stream. I'm Joe Pounder. I'm a Terker Distinguished Fellow here at the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. I'm also the CEO of Bullpen Strategy Group, a strategic advisory firm based here in Washington, D.C. I'll be your moderator for tonight's discussion, first-time moderator, so please take it easy on me, to you guys. This will be our 13th event in the series brought to you by Campaigns and Elections and the School of Media and Public Affairs. And I could not think of a better time to have tonight's discussion. The actual business of politics is getting bigger and bigger every campaign cycle. We think we reach records every campaign cycle, and then we break them for spending the next cycle. And at the same time, the campaign and public affairs industry is, I think, confronting what every industry is facing in terms of economic and technological transformation. So yes, that does mean we will be talking about artificial intelligence tonight and its impact. And I know the students who are watching or in the audience have a lot of questions about that and what it means for being a campaign professional in the future. And the great thing is we've got a great panel to talk about that in regards to the future political workforce and how the business of politics is changing and what it means to be a campaign professional. And we were actually just talking about it right before this. I think when I was growing up and was at GW, I didn't even know you could be a campaign professional at the end of the day. So on our panel, we have Doug Thornell, who's the CEO of SKDK, sitting here in the middle, one of the most influential strategic communications, integrated media, and political consulting firms in the United States, hands down. With over 25 years of experience, Doug has been a trusted advisor to Fortune 50 companies, major sports leagues, advocacy organizations, and leading Democratic campaigns. As CEO, Doug leads the day-to-day of a 200-plus person agency, huge, and also co-leads SKDK's award-winning advertising and political division. I mean, the names on this list are impressive, working with people like Wes Moore, Mark Kelly, the DCCC, NAACP, and SMP. To his left, we have Celia Bote, who is a vice president at Targeted Victory, one of the GOP's leading digital firms here in Washington, D.C., where she leads media planning and buying. She plans and executes cross-channel campaigns that include everything from local publications to sponsored podcast interviews to influencer partnerships, all very pertinent to the way the world is going. She's led dozens of corporate, congressional, gubernatorial, and Senate paid media campaigns. Prior to joining Targeted Victory, numerous campaign jobs up and down the East Coast. And then we have Jacob Khabie, who's right next to me on the left, a fourth-year SMPA student here at GW, majoring in political communication. Currently, he's interning at Ascend Digital Strategies, where he produces digital fundraising content for Democratic campaigns and candidates across the country. And he's previously worked as a field organizer and a volunteer for national and congressional campaigns. So I think we have great perspectives to bring to this conversation about the future political workforce and what it means to be a campaign professional. So I wanted to start off with, I think what is the big question, kind of get your opening thoughts about this topic, just your general thoughts. And the big question is, okay, how has the business of politics changed? I think, Doug, in the middle, let's start off with you. How has the business of politics changed?
Joe, it's great to be with you, and thank you to George Washington University, SMPA, and also to be on this panel with Celia and Jacob. It's really exciting. I think that, so a couple things. I think the fundamentals of campaigns haven't changed that much over the last 25 years. That's when I got into the game. You know, you still need money, you still need a message, you still need to mobilize, persuade, turn people out, and you still need to have media. And so those fundamentals haven't changed. But I do think what you're seeing, and I want to focus on three things in particular that have changed, I think, pretty dramatically over the last 3, 4, 5 years is, one, the desire for content has exponentially increased, both organic and paid. so campaigns really have to be able to scale that in a way that 15 years ago they probably didn't need to. You know, on some of these campaigns, you know, we're creating hundreds of unique creative content. And so that's a big change, I think, that we've seen. I think when you're looking at the creator world, that's something that really hadn't existed 5 years ago in terms of the campaign world. And now you're seeing campaigns bring on what they call creator partnership directors, people whose whole job is to just build relationships with these creators. And so that, like, organically, that means without having to pay these creators, that they're out there, you know, advocating for a cause or for a candidate. And I think the creator world, especially with how the media world is becoming so fragmented, and you're seeing, you know, less trust in traditional media, more opportunities for folks who have a Substack, a YouTube channel, a podcast to be influential. That is only going to grow. That's not going anywhere. And then obviously, you touched on it, AI. I think you're just seeing more and more examples of how AI is impacting campaigns, politics in general. AI-generated videos. You see a lot from the president, you know, and but also ways in which campaigns are using AI, I think, in actually fairly productive ways, which is whether it's for research, helping with editing videos. You know, we have used AI as a firm in terms of you know, the research aspect. Doing storyboarding, even if we're testing spots, doing quick test spots that are used by AI. So that's something that obviously is only going to, I think, be a big part of campaigns more and more. I think the real question with AI, and I'm sure we'll probably get into this, is just what are the ethical guidelines around it? Right now, they don't really seem to exist in any way, right? There's a lot, I mean, there definitely have been changes, digital fundraising, which I'm sure Celia can speak to. You know, we work with, you know, we're looking at ways that you can do predictive buying, use predictive buying tools to anticipate what your opponent is gonna do next week or 2 weeks based off of previous behavior. So a lot of exciting things. You know, we just launched today a new texting tool called Blizzard, Campaigns and Elections. Thank you for the coverage of that. So I think it's also campaigns are trying to figure out how they can be more of basically media companies in some respects. It's like, how do you distribute more and more of this content on all the different screens that people consume it?
I generally call it content machines.
Yeah.
Celia, if you want to jump in.
Well, I think that to build on Doug's point, it was when I started in politics, you could knock doors or make phone calls. Like, and that was 10 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. Those were my options for how I could get in. And now, like you're saying, because there's an opportunity for creator partnerships, content creators, a different kind of digital director than there was even 5 years ago, there's so many more opportunities and ways for young people to get into politics and then go on to make a career out of it and then build on the skills that they've learned in politics. I think the best thing about being young and in politics is you get the amount that what you do in year one is what your friends who do in other marketing agencies over 5-10 years. You have so many more opportunities to be quick and fast because election day is coming and you're either winning or you're losing, and you have every opportunity to sort of take advantage of learning new things and new skills. But I think that sort of just sums up, you know, what you were saying before. There's more ways to get into politics now than there was when I was coming up.
Absolutely.
To the ideal that there are still fundamentals.
Yeah.
You can still be a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
You're very young in your career, even though you're dealing with some very big realities, content machines, AI, and so forth. I think that's a good segue to you, Jacob. Being a student here, you know, why political communication? You know, what do you think like a political campaign pro career looks like, especially now that you've entered it a little bit?
Here's hoping. I chose to study political communication. At first it was sort of a want to combine my interest in politics and my interest in journalism. I was very involved in student journalism in high school and just like combining those two ideas. But as I've grown more into the field and learned more about what is political communication, I realized that politics is just as much about the policy as it is about communicating the policy. So much of the game these days is not necessarily like whether or not you agree with the policy, but like how you're communicating with it, how people, you know, how you're framing it. And I think that's a really important thing to study, really important thing to be looking at, especially with all the creative ways that different things are being framed these days. As for what a career for a campaign pro looks like, that's the million-dollar question, I guess. One thing I guess I've learned from my time interning at Ascend is that it can really look a lot of different ways. I've spoken to a lot of my coworkers about this, and they've all come from so many different directions. Some of them came from the campaign world, from the door knocking and phone calling world. Some of them came from the Hill. Some of them have come from other firms. So I really think that to be a campaign pro can be a very multifaceted thing.
You know, there's a segue question to that, which is how much do you think curiosity, intuition plays into someone going into campaign politics, but also the idea of, as they develop their career, maybe do they develop a specialty on the front end, like digital fundraising, communications, or does that come later as they go and have different roles on a campaign?
I think, I started, my first job was door knocking, and then I was a deputy political director, and then I was a press secretary, and then I went into digital fundraising, and then I was very bad at digital fundraising. So I carved out this world for myself at Targeted Victory, which is primarily, we are known for how much money we can raise online, and some of the best people, I think, on the right work at Targeted Victory when it comes to small dollar fundraising. And I was like, oh man, I love Targeted Victory. How do I find this world for myself? And I had developed an interest in media and media buying, and helped sort of grow that within Targeted Victory and within the clients that we had. All of that to sort of say, I started in a very specific place, and I think I've been at TV for 5 years now, and now I have found my place. And it took 4 or 5 tries to get there, though. I was not a very good comms person either. I just want to be very clear about that. Political was a little bit more in my wheelhouse, so I could start narrowing it down. But I think the people who come up through politics now, and the people who go and knock the doors and then sort of try digital fundraising or try being a comms person and kind of experience a bunch of different things, end up being sort of the best people the younger people that I end up working with long term, because they know how every facet of a campaign works, or how every facet of an advocacy organization works, which gives them different tools to be successful in whatever they want to specialize in long term.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. What I would say to any young person who's thinking about a career in politics is do a campaign. They're very special things to do. You meet a lot of different people. You're tested, but you really learn. You learn all aspects of it. And like Celia, I started as a field organizer a million years ago on the Gore campaign. I was sent out to Iowa, in Des Moines, Iowa. I didn't think I'd ever end up there, but it was the best experience of my life. And 12-hour days. You wake up, you're in the neighborhoods, you're building relationships, you're building your volunteer base, your precinct captains, and then I'm on the phones for 4 hours calling people, persuading them. That's really, I ended up, my career moved towards communications, but I really learned that on that campaign as a field organizer, because you're talking to so many different people. Some of them, they're all different. And so when I'm trying to talk to someone about why they should support, Al Gore's education policy, I may talk to 20 different people on a phone, over phones in a 4-hour period about that one topic, and they're all different. And so you got to understand how to meet them where they are, so that, understanding message and how to be persuasive. That was the best experience that I ever had, and it really set me up for my career after that. But you also learn all the other pieces. I think you're 100% right. Being curious, you touched on this, in your career, doing field. I never did finance or fundraising. I don't think I ever will. But I did. But I did do politics. I did the field piece. I was at the DS as their deputy political director. I was the communications director of the Congressional Black Caucus. So I sort of was able to see all these different aspects of campaigns that, when I ended up at SKDK, really served me well, because yes, I have an expertise in sort of strategic comms and advertising, but that over the course of my career, I got to see and be involved in so many other aspects.
Yeah, no matter how much things change, and how big the industry gets, I still think fundamentally it'll always be one based upon past experience, past case studies. Oh, I lived this in this campaign at some point. So as much as things change, some things do stay the same, ultimately. So one big thing that is changing is artificial intelligence. You know, we touched on it a little bit. We have to talk about it. It's a big topic. It's going to basically reinvent, I think, how every job is being done in the United States in one context or another. And I think, you know, I'd be curious to hear, I think we heard it a little bit from you, Doug, earlier about how your firms are implementing AI. And how do you think AI will ultimately change what it means to be a campaign professional? And also a little bit like, you know, everyone is doing it. How hard is the transition? You know, how have you seen the process go? So I'll turn it over to Doug and Celia for you guys to kind of interject.
So we started really integrating AI into our firm probably a year and a half ago, and it was done in a very, I think, like a strategic way. It wasn't forcing folks to use all these tools. It was really important that I communicated to folks why it was important that we look at this, because I see AI not as a threat, but as a tool and a way to make people's daily lives at work more efficient. And so we created an AI council. We tested, and we still do, and we're using, but we test out and beta test a bunch of different tools in spaces where we think that will be a help with productivity. We're seeing some real helpful signs on basic things like being able to, the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling. It's a 300-page document, and summarizing it very quickly and doing research and clips. I think the most important thing for folks who are in college right now and looking for a career in politics is that they are very curious and interested in AI. They don't need to be engineers and tech experts, but they do need to know how to use it in a way that is going to help them do things faster. And so I think that at least in the short term, what you're gonna probably see is more and more of these people who are being hired at a junior level who do have, I wouldn't say an expertise, but like a real, I guess, being very proficient in those tools. And I imagine they're probably, it's sort of like when I got out of college, the internet was starting to boom. And you either understand, how to use it and use it to your advantage, and or you kind of get left behind. And so that's, I think, one of the things. And we've been very intentional about how we're using it. We have a code of conduct. A lot of our clients expect that. So, and we're very transparent where we use it and where we don't. But I also think it's also really important when you're on a campaign or you're running a firm that people understand that this is not about replacing you. It's about how do we make you, better. All tools need to be tech tools, whether they're AI driven or not. It's all about how do you make the work experience more productive, more efficient for folks so that they can do more and enjoy their work more.
Yeah, I want to say this. This is what I feel is, I'm not the official line of Targeted Victory, but I'm very much of the belief of like you have to find an LLM that works for you, and you need to figure out how to leverage it and to make yourself more efficient. I use it to argue with myself when I'm building a media plan. Like I build a persona of a client and we'll be like, here's the media plan, what holes do you see in this? Okay. And like for me, it's not great. Much, but otherwise I would have to get on the phone with the client who I'm trying to explain a media plan to, who might not, and I'll be caught on my heels. And so I can go into this pitch thinking ahead already. I think, though, to your point about this sort of younger generation that's coming up now, I think, the way that they have grown up and the way that they're going through school and through college, they're already sort of wired for it, and they're 10 steps ahead of where I am. We hired a kid on my team a few weeks ago, and I asked him to play with AI to some capacity to help me build this competitive I've been trying to manually pull via email for about 6 months now. He figured it out in 2 weeks, and it was 4 times what I had asked for, and he did it all by finding an AI, whether, I don't remember if it was Gemini or ChatGPT or Perplexity or one of the other ones that's out there, but it took him what was taking me 6 months to pull by hand, he did in 2 weeks. And it was far and away better than anything I could have ever produced myself, which I think is an add to us as we have been in this field for so long and we have all of this knowledge that they can help streamline our processes and make our work more efficient. So those projects I've been talking about for 8 months now are starting to get closer to the finish line, where it would probably be another 4 months before I had time to pick it up again, which is great as we're trying to evolve in this sort of AI world.
So Jacob, the message is clear. You have to be AI enabled in order
Yeah,
to
I
get a
guess so,
job in
yeah.
the future. So how are you using AI?
Right now, at my job, I'm not using it all that much. What I do at Ascend is largely write fundraising emails, and just I feel like having AI write my fundraising emails for me is
And I don't
probably
think
not-
that ChatGPT allows you to.
No.
I think there's a
Yeah,
political
I think
block
there's
on their
probably a
side.
line there,
Some
yeah.
limits.
Let's
Some
just
limits.
keep that there anyway.
Exactly, yeah. So I'm not using it all that much at my job. I feel like most of the place where I've seen AI come up more is academically, and I think a lot of professors are still struggling with the idea of how can I allow AI in my classroom? What are the ethical guidelines? Can I let my students write their papers using AI? The answer to that is no. So I think academically, I really have tried to veer away from it, but I'm very interested in the ways that it's started to come up politically, how it can make the political world easier or different. There's also the idea of, will AI replace me?
Well, that is the next question.
I know, yeah. Which I guess something that I think my parents have been very alarmist about. They're a little scared about it. So it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, yeah.
Okay, well, that's the big question. Doug, I think I'll pose it to you. Will artificial intelligence lead you to be hiring more or less people in the future?
Well, we're not hiring fewer people right now. So, like I said, I think that for someone coming into the political workforce, it is going to be essential that they are, AI proficient, and they have, and because I think that the jobs that they're going to be doing, the ability to be able to, do these things faster and quicker, there's going to be a premium on that. And also in the creative space, being able to create content faster so that you can scale more is obviously going to be very important. But I'm actually not seeing, especially when I'm looking at campaigns that I've been advising, you're not seeing a significant drop right now in, bodies on the campaigns, right? That certainly may happen, but there is still a premium in our world as consultants and strategists that clients put on smart people who have experiences, who can be in a room and advise them how to navigate very challenging situations. And that will always, I believe, be the case. And so there are going to be tools that are going to make the ability to communicate and analyze data and things like that much faster. But right now, what I'm seeing is that there will be jobs for you, Jacob, and your colleagues who are going to be graduating. There is still a need, especially for those entry-level campaign jobs, field organizing jobs that Celia and I did. Those are really important. There are no robots right now that are going into these communities who are meeting with pastors and business leaders and all these folks that you need to have actual relationships with. That's still really important. So look, I think there may be some diminishment on campaigns at sort of along the margins, but you'll also see growth in creator space. So like identify the areas where there's going to be growth, because I think you're going to see campaigns aren't going to get smaller. They're only getting bigger. And so, but it's identifying those places where there's growth, and that's in the digital media space, that's in the content space, that's digital fundraising. So, if you're thinking about a career, those are the areas, and comms too, still very important. So I would not be concerned quite yet. I think it definitely have a cycle left in us in terms of how things are right now, but it is coming and it's moving pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think the day we see AI-driven robots doing door knocking, we're all screwed, at that point.
I think at that point we're all out of jobs. Like Doug and I don't have jobs either. Like we're done.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation about AI and how it's being implemented. I think the good news that people are hearing is especially we're seeing at our firm too, it's not stopping the hiring. If anything, we need more people who are AI trained, enabled than ever before. I think 2 years ago, clients were questioning the AI usage, like, oh, are you using AI to write your content? And now they're actually demanding, hey, are you using AI to do the mundane things? Because I want the creative aspects of your head. I want the strategic parts at the end of the day. And I think that leads to the next broader question about kind of the nature of the political industry and the structure of the political industry, this notion of working at a firm versus being maybe a one-man, one-woman consultant band out there. And I think Doug and Celia, both of your firms are actually part of Stagwell, which is a large holding company. We've actually seen, I think, over the last decade, some consolidation within the political and public affairs industry. We've got Stagwell, Omnicom acquiring FP1, excuse me, Plus Communications, PPHC, which I think is about to list on NASDAQ here in the next couple of weeks. And my own firm is part of a larger holding company. I think we've seen private equity money coming into the political and public affairs space, especially for mid-sized firms. Is that changing the industry at all? I know we've had it in the lobbying industry maybe 20 years ago, but it's definitely something we're seeing in the past few years when it comes to politics and public affairs.
You want to take it?
I think that, from what I've seen and from coming up in this, I think it's helped professionalizing the industry, right? I think that before, and there's not, I have plenty of friends who are one-man consultant shops and they do incredible work. But for somebody who does want to live sort of in this DC environment, New York media environment, that you have sort of the security of a company and the resources of a company like a Stagwell or an Omnicom or a GP3 that can bring more stability into the industry. I think you probably both, after my first field campaign, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna have a job for 4 months. Now what do I do? Do I go home? Do I stay here? There were questions about sort of my future, and that I was like, I can't do this forever. I want to go land at an agency. And I think that sort of what Stagwell offers to our two firms in particular is sort of this sort of professional politics aspect. And we bring, I think, and we'll get into this later, I'm sure, sort of into the public affairs work that Stagwell offers, we bring sort of a unique perspective, whether it's about right-leaning media, left-leaning media, DC as a whole, advocacy issues as a whole, that might not have otherwise been available to us, or something where we could even get a foot in the door from the first go-around. That's sort of how I viewed it over the last couple of years, especially somebody who was out of a job for 3 or 4 months at a time when I was early in my career. And I think that's changed for a lot of kids now. We get kids who come right out of college and never experience where's my next paycheck gonna go? Where do I go from here? Can I put a full tank of gas in my car right now? Those sorts of questions are probably not as drastic as they were for me when I did this for the first time.
Yeah, can I ask a question a little off of that? I think stability is becoming even more important to younger campaign professionals. I know when I started, I think I moved around 5 or 6 times in the beginning parts of my career, always for the next promotion, the next salary bump and so forth. But that meant leaving DC and working all across the country. Is that the same today? Are you seeing that? I think it's good insight for, I think, the students here. Is that the way you have to do it now?
I don't think so, not anymore. At least from what I've seen from kids coming in now. I have friends who have the campaign bug, right? They've been back in DC for 6 months and they're like, I really want to go to Maine. I really want to get back out on the trail. And I'm like, really? Again? You want to do it again? But I don't think it's the same sort of sense of urgency. I think it's you go get the campaign experience, you're like, I can land at an SKDK. I can land at a targeted victory, or land at a committee. I think committees have also become more professionalized over the years as well. But I don't think it's the same chase of I was a field director, now I'm going to be a political director, now I'll get to be a deputy campaign manager, and then I'll become the general consultant. I don't think that's the same anymore because people starting at the agencies from the ground up, and then they work up to a higher level within the agency, and the agencies will have a bigger control, or not control, bigger play in each of these campaigns moving forward.
If you look at my resume from the age of 22 until 30, it's 15 jobs, right? And there was one year where I paid taxes in 7 states, right? Yeah. So it was exactly as you described it, Joe. You're going from one state to the next, you're going from one job to the next. Look, the nature of campaigns, if that's what you really want to do, is that they end and you are out of work. Now, maybe your person wins and you can go work for them, whether it's in the Senate or gubernatorial, but they end. And so if you're in that world, you have to accept the fact that these are cyclical jobs, that you are going to be out of work for a couple months, and then you may need to find, and then if you want to do another campaign, you do that. I sort of went from campaign to the Hill to campaign to committee. I found for me, it was, it was I loved it because it was just the experience and the exposure and the networks you build. And but I also think that, and I'm like the old man on this panel, but I think that there may be a slightly different mentality of people, younger people now who are coming up, where the expectation in terms of the jobs that they're going to get and how long they have to do certain things is less. Like that. Yeah. I mean, my career was exactly what Celia said. I was a field organizer, then a deputy field and then a press secretary, and then like all of these different steps to finally ultimately get to SKDK. I think what I'm seeing now, especially at SKDK, is that there are people who are doing sort of either a government or a campaign job, and then immediately going into an agency, and they're fantastic. Yeah. I think my mentality back then and my peers at the time was, I guess like I think we felt like we just had to be in the actual campaign game or the Hill game, maybe much longer, maybe longer than we needed to, but that was a little bit. I think things have changed a little bit now in terms of how. Also, I think you're seeing more and more people start their own businesses. Right. And back then, I mean, it just was like you had some core GOP companies, Republican, Democratic companies that had been, mainstays in politics, and it was just harder to sort of start your own thing. Less people did it. Now more people are doing that, and they're starting their own thing. They're taking a risk, and so, the moving around piece and being, as having such a volatile career, I do think it's probably changed since. Over the last 10, 15 years, but I don't know. I loved it.
Well, I'm gonna ask Jacob. Like you're the young person on this panel. What's your expectation? Do you want to stay here and be in DC, or do you want to go out there and move all across the country?
I graduate and then it's the 2026 midterms. So this is something that I've been thinking a lot about. For as much as I love DC and I would love to stay in DC, I think there's really no better time in my life to sort of like pick up and move somewhere else, especially I know there's a lot of really exciting races coming up in the 2026 midterms, races that are going to shape, obviously they're going to shape the outcome of the House and the Senate, and they're going to shape how the 2028 election goes. And I just think that there's, even if the expectation is different now for campaign pros, my personal belief is that there's no better time to pick up my life, move somewhere, get that experience on the ground while it is still possible, and then the end game I think is to come back here, but I think I can take my time getting back here.
That's very smart.
That's the right mentality.
That's the right.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
get
the
out
right
of
mentality.
DC.
Get
out of there.
Totally.
Be on the road, bounce around the country, meet different people, learn how campaigns are done in different places. You absolutely have to do that. And DC's always going to be here, and you can come back.
And I think the thing that I will say that has been a negative of the rise of agencies and how easy it is to get into the agency pipeline is that I learned how to talk to voters knocking doors and being on camera and like the volunteer base that I built up. I'm still friends with some of the volunteers I made back in like Louisiana. Yeah. Like they're still some of my personal friends. And you miss that when you're in DC. You get used to this, like the DC elite brand and stereotype exists for a reason. And you miss sort of that like personal touch that you get with people who are actually voting for the candidates you're working for. I'd say that was the biggest negative to the rise of agencies. But if you want to go get out on the trail and you want to meet people and pick up your life and move to, candidly, I think Democrats have a much easier time going to much nicer places than Republicans end up. My friends who are Dems go to LA and I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And they're very different.
I love Louisiana.
I love Louisiana, to be clear, but the juxtaposition is, yeah. But if you want to do it, you should absolutely do it when you're young.
Great. Yeah. Well, I think that's all very good advice. And so we've hit the big topics. We've hit AI. We've hit being in a firm, being a consultant. I want to start thinking about what's the next big thing. And I think Doug, we're here at SMPA talking about campaigns and public affairs, but we've got a lot of students who also do media here at SMPA. Just last month, Stagwell and SKDK and Targeted Victory, you guys hosted the Disruptor Media Showcase, which was meant to highlight the playbooks that now go along with brand engagement editorial creativity and monetization. Only two of those three terms are new terms, monetization being the longest run term there. So we're talking about influencers, podcasts, Substacks, premium audiences, all new. What were the big takeaways, I think, from your guys' event?
So this had never been done before, this type of showcase. And Targeted, SKDK, Stagwell came together because we felt like this was an opportunity to put these platforms and publishers on display, make sure that people inside of Washington sort of were familiar with how this world is evolving. Because I think there's still a lot of hesitation and reluctance to engage either through advertising or through just basic engagement with a lot of these platforms that are now attracting bigger and bigger audiences. So one big takeaway is this is not a fad. Like, these guys aren't going away. They're only going to grow and eat up more and more market share. And as you see the faith that people have in traditional media outlets continue to drop, and that happened much more quickly on the right than it has on the left, but it is starting to happen on the left, you're going to see opportunities for these platforms who are non-traditional, who have multiple different social channels that they deliver content, create content, and distribute it on, grow and be players in terms of how people consume news and media. And so I think one big takeaway is just how important it is for brands and for campaigns, for folks in the administration in Congress to sort of to make sure that they're actually getting to know who these folks are. And they're not big entities. And some of them have been around for a while. I mean, Breitbart's been around for a while, Daily Caller, you know, on the left, the Crooked Media guys. But there are new ones, and so one, it's sort of engage them the way you would engage a traditional journalist or traditional media outlet. That's going to be so important. And then figuring out smart ways that, you know, maybe you start breaking news on these platforms. So instead of going to a Washington Post or New York Times or Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal, you know, you are breaking news on, you know, with Mo News, which is a popular outlet, or with Courier News, or at Notice, who's a new platform that came up in the last couple of years, nonprofit. So, and I think the other thing is just how innovative they are in terms of how they're trying to think about and build and grow their audiences. A big focus on video content, and also they're all, you know, many of them do have. If you look at them, they, you know, and read their content, like, they do lean either to the left or the right. But one of the things that they always emphasize, and what they try to, I think, promote, is that this is like fact-based reporting.
Right.
And so this is a trusted place for their subscribers and consumers to go to, and that creates this personal connection to these platforms. So if you're a brand, or if you're a campaign, or if you're an organization, if you're thinking about where you're going to deliver content, going to these places actually might be more effective, because the people who are reading them trust the outlet. So they're probably going to trust the content. If it's native content, if it's a banner, I mean, whatever it might be, they're probably more likely to trust that content because they're trusting the person who's distributing it.
Right. Celia, I want you to chime in on that as well, but I also want to throw in there too, like, every election cycle, we've seen new and innovative things. You know, I guess I'm going to date myself, and like some cycles it was YouTube, Google.
Well, to some people, YouTube is still new.
Yeah.
Twitter, X now, and so forth. So playing off of the event, like, what are we going to see this cycle too? Like, what's the new thing that's coming?
Some folks might disagree with me on this, but I like to say what's old is now new again. I think you're going to see a massive rise in sort of podcast streaming audio, and maybe satellite radio to some extent. Traditionally, I have not built it. I let the linear guys take care of all audio and streaming radio or anything to that effect. I think that what we saw with Trump and how he did his little podcast circuit, and people like the Joe Rogan podcast that was talked about forever and ever. And then he also did like Barstool podcasts. Like he went to reach people that we would probably not think to typically reach them. Like we would, I don't know the name of the Barstool podcast he was on, so please forgive me. But I would never think to go advertise or try to advertise on that kind of podcast to reach like a traditional 3 or 4, Republican or persuadable voter at the end of the day. So I think between that and then sort of figuring out how influencers fit into campaigns. I personally think for Republicans, more often than not, Republicans or influencers seem pretty inauthentic. And I think that it can, with some of the types of clients we're working for, it can become more of a hindrance to the campaign than the help. I think the Dems have a much easier time bringing sort of in these young influencers who have very loyal followings and make them part of the campaign's overall strategy. So I think between audio, sort of a rise of audio all over again. I'm sure you've had audio folks in your office all the time being like, audio is back.
Yeah.
People they want audio again.
Right.
It just sort of rise, that's what we'll sort of see play out. But I think the traditional of like still getting folks to agree to more streaming budget is still a fight a lot of the times. That linear is not king in all situations. That you need a CTV buy, and I think we're still sort of stuck there. But I think it'll be a little bit better in a $11 billion midterm cycle that I know we're all hoping for. But influencers, audio, and sort of how those two are going to work themselves out. Like, do we, like, what does Mo News want? Does Mo News want political advertisements? Probably not. If I'm him, I probably would say no thank you, but he has a very loyal following of people. The Free Press, Barry Weiss, and what she did, she started her Substack and now it's been acquired by Paramount. She's going to be the editor-in-chief at CBS. Like, that's just sort of she was effectively a news influencer. Like, that's sort of how she built this incredible brand that she now has, and now has this, insane job after just 4 years of having a Substack and building a following. I think sort of trying to answer those questions this cycle and how people want to address them, and if they want to like dip their toe in the water or back in the water, if we're talking about audio, will sort of shape some of the conversations we're having early on this year. Or maybe linear is still king and I'm very wrong, but.
Well, all that is very fascinating. I think like it's so true. Like figuring this out in 2026 is going to be the big takeaway, I think, in how it's implemented and so forth. I think, Jacob, I'll turn to you. Like when I was growing up and doing campaigns at the very beginning, the first 15 minutes of the Today Show could set the tone for the entire rest of the day and so forth. Not true today and so forth. What could we be missing about who has influence? Because you're growing up with it.
Yes.
Podcasts, Substacks, all the influencers. Who should we be listening to that we're not?
Gen Z, I think we've, Gen Z has a really interesting relationship with politics because for a lot of us, our first memory of a presidential election was the 2016 election, which was by no means an ordinary president. I think, yeah, it was by no means a normal presidential election.
That's crazy.
Yeah, sorry. And so, and then just like everything from then, like 2016 presidential election, COVID and all the effects that that had on politics and everything that happened in the godforsaken year 2020, and everything since then, we just grown in this time where politics has been nothing but ordinary. And I think also Gen Z, both the people who are interested in politics and the people who aren't. You said something about the content machine. Gen Z, I think, produces content like no other generation has, largely due to the rise of social media. I guess, are constantly posting on like TikTok, constantly posting on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, posting on Instagram, posting. I know people at school that have Substacks. We're constantly creating content in some way, shape, or form. And I think, as we enter the workforce, I think we have so many different ways of producing content that could become very influential in the next couple of years.
I actually never thought of it that way. The Gen Z is, in and of themselves, content machines, and everything that you do every single day. I think campaigns are going to have to adjust to feeding those machines every single second of every single day. I'm going to ask one more question and then turn it to the audience for any questions that you guys might have. But I think this is a fascinating topic and one that's not really appreciated here in DC or among people who are getting into campaigns. I'm going to turn to public affairs and how public affairs is changing. It's fascinating when you do politics, you're in your own camp, Republican, Democrat, and so forth. But when you work in public affairs, you're working with consultants on the other side of the aisle. You kind of hit on it a little, a little bit earlier. Doug and Celia, can you shed some light on how, especially for students here, how it works, where you may end up working with a consultant on the other side, probably more in the corporate space than in the advocacy or the issue space. But can you shed light, because I don't think a lot of people appreciate that, like, Republicans and Democrats do actually end up working together, especially when it comes to public affairs work.
I think I think most people's perception of Washington is that Republicans and Democrats are at each other's throats and nothing gets done, and they, and they're constantly fighting, and and it's just total dysfunction, right? That's sort of what is projected out there, and to some degree in Congress, you could say that's true.
Yes.
But there's a whole other world outside of Congress that is built around how organizations and brands and if foundations advocate for themselves. And that does require a bipartisan approach in many cases. Because, if you're Coca-Cola or you're Pepsi and you're trying to figure out how to build relationships in Washington, it's important that they have relationships on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. And so they have to figure out, if that's the case, what's that message look like inside of the Beltway or even beyond the Beltway, right? And Targeted does a lot of work outside of the Beltway in terms of like their local engagement work. So the need to have smart, collaborative strategists from both sides of the aisle working for a company is paramount. And one of the things that I think Stagwell has looked at is they have SKDK. There is no doubt who we are. We are a Democrat. We are a Democratic-centered firm that does that on the campaign side, but on the public affairs side, we do a lot of work with brands, nonprofits, universities, et cetera. And then the same thing with Targeted. They do Republican campaign work, but they also do a lot of these similar type projects. And so at times when we partner together, I think that actually makes the project and the advice that we give to our clients more helpful and it gives them a 360 view into the world. I don't always know what Republicans are thinking or who they're listening to or talking to. I don't necessarily presume to always know that. And I would say Targeted probably can say the same thing but when you're together and you're able to, in terms of who people need to get to know, what that message is, it's essential to, I think, organizations who are trying to be effective in Washington. And we do a particular type of work in the strategic comms, public affairs world. There's obviously lobbyists that we don't do that, but there's the lobbying world that you see this as well. Most companies have Republican lobbyists and Democratic lobbyists, right? And so it's just it's like, it's sort of a window into this other world in Washington where the collaboration is, it's less about sort of the ideological perspective we're coming from, and it's more about how do we get these things done for the clients who have retained us to help them get this thing done, and we've got to be able to work together.
Yeah, and then we also know each other's tricks when it comes time to the election season, so it's great. Right. I know what Doug's going to do, he knows what I'm going to do. No, but I think probably think it's something that we should talk about more, especially as it's become so polarized in the world. Like, between Republicans and Democrats just despising each other online. Like, we do a lot of work with SKDK, and some of the partners that Doug's from are my favorite people in politics now, right? Because I have so much to learn from them and from their experience, and that we are able to collaborate and do what is best for a client and build off the strengths that each person's have. Whether it's, okay, well, I think we should do Fox News, and someone's like, no, you need more CNN for this type of campaign. Like, there are so many more ways that we work together. We probably work together more than we work apart, so, like at least in this time of year, where Republicans and Democrats can come together to like deliver a very effective product for a client based on the experience that we have in DC. And I don't think that it's talked about enough. And maybe if it was, the world wouldn't be, at least the online world, what Gen Z is saying online would be a little bit less divisive, that it's not all that serious sometimes, and that we can learn from one another.
Well, I think that's a little bit of an uplifting place to open up to end the conversation, but open up the floor to any questions that the audience may have for our panelists. And don't be shy, because then otherwise I have to ask more questions. Okay, oh, we've got one.
Thank you. I think throughout this discussion, well, first of all, thank you guys so much for being here. It's been really interesting to listen to all your responses and kind of get this perspective. Particularly something that I've been thinking about throughout the course of y'all's responses has been this changing attitude in America amongst like everyday individuals about information, about the validity of information. How is it like for you as people that are attempting to like persuade people and attempting to get people to join your campaigns and to agree with your campaigns to try and assuade people who perhaps have like different thresholds of information, different understandings of information, where the degrees of media literacy are kind of so varied over the general population that you're crafting campaigns that are trying to appeal to a broad scope of people, but even what that appeal can look like is so varied across the entirety of the country. So perhaps like, what is that like right now?
Well, I think that it's a really good question. Where we are today versus, say, 15 years ago, it was so much easier to put together media plans 15, 20 years ago. There weren't many other outlets. You put together a TV plan, and it's sort of the local TV stations. It's, radio and like newspaper print, and that was sort of it. And now there's so many platforms and ways to reach people, which makes the media planning complicated, but I actually think it gives you more ways to reach folks where they are. And so you have a whole lot of people who've like cut the cord. They're not, they don't have cable, they don't have, they don't have Fios, right? They're streaming only. You have folks who aren't even consuming information from traditional media outlets anymore. So you have to break through to your question, I think, is you really have to understand who do they trust, what kind of content they like to consume, when do they like to consume it, where are they consuming it? And if you don't understand those kind of behavioral components of your audience, whether it's a voter or a consumer, you're not going to break through. And you also need to know who the right messengers are, because there are trusted messengers that will be able to break through that maybe a candidate for office might not be able to in the same way. So that I think is really important. We're in a place where, again, like, if I was pitching a story 20 years ago, I was at the, it was sort of like, if an editor or a reporter turned me down, like, I was screwed. Like, I couldn't get a story, there weren't, now you can, put it up on Substack, you can write your own Substack, put it up there, you can do a podcast around it, you can put it out on other social media platforms. There's ways now to get information out there, and there's ways now to reach people who have really not checked out, but disconnected, that just didn't exist 20 years ago. And there were plenty of people 20 years ago that probably had disconnected too. They were just a lot harder to reach because you didn't have these tools now in these platforms where they are living and consuming information. They sort of just weren't, you weren't able to reach them. And so, yeah, I think it's really fundamentally understanding your audience.
Yeah, and I think that when this is about the business of politics that has also evolved. Pollsters have evolved. Like, the basic tenets of a campaign have always stayed the same. How they work and how they operate is totally different. Like, questions that I ask for on a poll are questions I wouldn't have asked for a poll 5 years ago about media mix or media consumption habits. And at any given time on a political campaign, I might have 4 campaigns running with 4 different messengers and 4 different messages, because that is the type of that's the messenger, the creative mix, and the platform that each individual person wants. And I think because Gen Z especially has helped create the sort of content for us. It's 6-second ads for me last year that I never would have think to make myself. And they're like, no, but like 18 to 25-year-olds are going to eat this up. And I'm like, awesome, let's do it. That sounds great, right? And so I think that to the point is, like, as we've evolved, campaigns have evolved. Like, Doug's right, it's always your audience first and where they are. We can just be smarter about how we do it, and there's so many more options to us than there was even in 2015, 2016.
Jacob, is that what we're facing? 6-second attention spans?
Unfortunately, for as much as I love my generation, our attention span is very short. And that's definitely going to pose a challenge in the coming years when it comes to the people who are more used to this long-form media. Things just need to be shorter, things need to be snappier, things like you really just need to do a better job of grabbing people's attention.
I agree with that, but but there's still, there is still the rise of podcasts, which reward these longer conversations. And, one takeaway, obviously, from the 24 election is like you got to go on Joe Rogan, but the other, I think, takeaway is like you have to be comfortable enough in your own skin and authentic enough to be able to last on some of these podcasts for 50, 60 minutes.
Endurance.
It's endurance, right? And you have to be willing to get a little bit out of your comfort zone. It's not like going on MSNBC or Fox where you're doing a 5 or 6 minute hit. You got your talking points, 6 minutes break, between the other person on the panel. You're really talking 3 minutes. On a podcast, it's a very, in many ways, very personal, revealing platform for folks that, you really have to understand that if you're going to do it, like you gotta open yourself up, or else you're going to come across as fake and phony.
Which is why that's why I think this might have been a unique podcast, sponsored podcast might have been unique to Trump. I mean, President Trump is probably one of the only people who could go on Rogan for 3 hours and whatever he says, people are gonna be like, well, that's Trump. Like, that's right. Like, that's
especially
why,
in a campaign.
especially in a campaign, which is why maybe podcasts had their year with Trump doing the circuit, and now it's over. Probably not, but maybe.
Okay, so our time is almost coming to an end. That was a fascinating discussion. I want to leave it with some just practical advice that you would give to the students here, maybe in like 15 seconds or less, 20 seconds or less, but also then, Jacob, what's some practical advice that you would give to Doug and Celia about making sure that they have great firms for the next generation of operatives? So I'll start off with Celia, if you want to, what practical advice would you leave for the audience?
I think I always give the same advice, and I'll add one on this time. I'll add two. Go work on the campaigns, go knock doors, go make the phone calls, learn how to talk to the average person, the average voter. Like you will never learn more than being able to communicate with a person who is just a voter. They are a voter who cares, and they're not a political operative. Get to know your opponents, talk to Democrats or talk to Republicans, talk to people you wouldn't always talk to, because you will learn so much more from them and hopefully help reduce some of the division that we see rising especially from younger generations, my generation, whatever else. And then find an LLM that you like. Become more comfortable with AI, whether it's Perplexity or Gemini. I like ChatGPT for some things. I like Perplexity for other things. That's my advice in 15 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're going to get some bipartisan agreement here. Do a campaign. They're the best. They're a great experience. That's where you learn politics. And do a number of them. I thought working on the Hill was a great experience as well. So if you can get that Hill experience and you can get that campaign experience, you're going to be set up really well. And then ultimately, you mentioned this earlier, be curious. Try some things out, take some risks. Don't necessarily specialize early on in your career. Maybe ultimately specialize, but try some different positions out in the world of politics so that you're well-rounded when you ultimately get to a firm.
Jacob?
Yeah, I think both of you have shown the capacity, and your firms have shown the capacity to be, like you said, be curious, be open to these new forms of media, but I think that's generally the advice that I would give to political firms across the board. I think when it comes to Gen Z, we are a very curious generation, and we have a lot of different ways that we like to express our curiosity, so be open to all the different ways in which we might be creating content, expressing that content, expressing our beliefs, stuff like that.
Wow.
Great.
Well, this hour absolutely flew. It was a fascinating discussion. I learned a lot from each and every one of you. So I want to thank you all for doing this panel. Just as kind of an announcement at the end, we've got the next Campaigns and Elections and SMPA event will be Tuesday, December 2nd at 6 p.m. here in the Media and Public Affairs studio, titled Post-Election Review, Road to the Midterms. So we will have 2 gubernatorial races done by that time. So if you're interested in those events, please register on the website smpa.gwu.edu/events. So I think that's the first time I've read out a website in a long time. So, but again, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. And thank you everyone for watching tonight. Perfect.